morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. It is decision day for five-star quarterback Jared Curtis. That means we are all over every angle of this story today, including why in the final moments kind of prior to it, Curtis made what I think is a little bit of a curious decision. Could be a reason why on this. And we'll talk about why I think legitimately there is perhaps some good reason for optimism if you're a Georgia fan about what Curtis may say later on. We'll also talk about if he does pick Georgia, what to expect after that. We'll cover all of that ground today. And, of course, our guy Jon Stinchcomb joins us today, too. There's also a very weird scenario playing out with one of Georgia's, not quite rivals because they don't play very frequently, but certainly competitors on the national scene. We'll tell you more about that here coming up today as well. So decision for Curtis goes down 5:30 tonight. We're getting you ready for that here right now. So what do you say we get it started? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
In the final moments before a commitment announcement from a major prospect, almost anything that's sort of official and verifiable and kind of on the record is going to be at least somewhat interesting. And I would say that is also true today now that we've arrived at decision day for five-star quarterback Jared Curtis. It has been reported at DawgNation.com that Curtis will not have, in fact, let me just show you this on the screen here, that Curtis, even though it was originally expected, was going to have another in-home visit from members of the Oregon coaching staff and Georgia offensive coordinator Mike Bobo after both were with Curtis last week. They were going to get one more crack at this weekend. Apparently, though, that did not happen. Curtis letting both coaching staffs know he didn't need to hear from them anymore. Reading from DawgNation.com, this is from the weekend, Jeff Sintel, our DawgNation recruiting insider, writing that DawgNation has learned that five-star quarterback Jared Curtis has not made his decision yet. Is that still true today? Interesting to consider. Jeff goes on to write, in advance of Monday's big commitment decision reveal, Curtis's representatives have prepared two different announcement videos to go in either direction of the decision. So there's a ceremony that takes place later on this evening. A video will play. The video will obviously help reveal the place where Curtis is going. And we are told that there are two different versions of that video that have been recorded. But here was what I thought was kind of a curious decision from Curtis, different than what I believe the initial reporting was going to be. It was initially thought that both we'll keep that up on the screen for a second. It was initially thought that both coaching staffs, Mike Bobo and the folks from folks from Oregon, would get one more opportunity here. But as Jeff wrote this weekend at DawgNation.com, the lobbying has actually all been done. Curtis and his family are not expected to meet with either program anymore over the course of that weekend, leading to what's going to happen here today. Initially, the thought was they would speak to both coaching staffs one more time, but obviously long flight for the Oregon people, a little bit of travel for the Georgia people. They reach out and say, hey, listen, why don't y'all just not worry about that? We've heard enough. We don't need to know more than this. We're going to be able to have all the information we need to make our decision. It's a little bit, curious. They didn't need that additional conversation, but not necessarily a problem really either for the Georgia side or the Oregon side. It's just simply an indication here that everything that could be known, everything that might need to be known, the Curtis family already feels like they know it, and now, simply put, the ball is in their court to make a decision. They didn't need to hear the final pitch from either Oregon or Georgia, the two schools battling for Curtis, because they had already heard what they needed to hear. Now, the question is, in addition to, obviously, very sizable compensation, which, of course, has been talked about plenty, if Curtis has already heard what he needs to hear from both schools, it seems fair to ask, what did Curtis hear from both of these schools? In addition to, hey, here's how much we can pay you, and here's what we'll be willing to do in comparison to what other programs might do, what else would Curtis have heard? And I don't believe that's a rhetorical question. I think it's worth examining here a little bit. And for the next few minutes, that's what I want to talk about here. the final pitch from both Oregon and Georgia, perhaps what it was, and what might prove to be the winning argument that secures his services. Now, on the Oregon side, here's what we know. Oregon has really gone all in on Jared Curtis. They had a high-profile quarterback commit. They were kind of willing to let him walk because they wanted to focus solely on Curtis. So if the Oregon side's making its pitch to Curtis, that's what they're saying. Hey, we have gone all in on you. You are our guy. That's what they are going to say. Now, you might expect that. And if you're like me, though, you're actually more interested in what is Georgia saying here? If that's what the Oregon pitch is, what is Georgia saying? And that's where I think for us on this show, caring more about the Georgia side than the Oregon side, that's where I think things get really interesting. Because while Oregon can say that we're all in on you, Georgia seemingly can say, we have been all in on you for years now. You have been our guy forever. And that's not because Curtis is the only quarterback that Georgia is recruiting or has recruited. We know, I mean, even like the last few days, Bobo has visited with other quarterbacks. We've talked about other quarterbacks in the class of 2026. We've talked about other quarterbacks in the class of 2025. That there's always kind of an ever-present conversation when it comes to Georgia and potential quarterback prospects. But even with these other quarterbacks being recruited, it has never been in dispute how much Georgia seemingly prioritized Jared Curtis over everybody else. And this is one of those things I think we should more closely examine here now that the official and sort of the final decision for Curtis is expected to be made today. And let me kind of pull back the curtain on something, sort of break the fourth wall for a minute, and tell you something that you may not know about, you may not care about very much. We don't talk a ton about numbers to you because that's just not interesting to you, our audience metrics, things like that. But as somebody who kind of does this for a living, both working for a website, but also our kind of video stuff here too, here's what I can tell you. That in a given year, fans are almost always far more interested in kind of a current recruit than they are a future recruit. Even if the future recruit is sort of a better prospect on paper than the current recruit, fans just sort of have a very present tense mindset when it comes to recruiting. So if we're talking about a prospect like 2 cycles from now, if we're in 2026, if we're in the 2026 cycle, but it's a 2027 prospect, there's only so much interest the average fan's going to have there. That just seems like really long into the future. It seems like sort of a separate thing from whatever the present tense recruiting conversation is. And oftentimes fans just don't have a great deal of interest in recruits from a future year. They sort of think about that as a separate conversation from the present tense recruiting conversation that's ongoing. But while fans have every right to sort of be interested in what they choose to be interested in and disregard what they choose to disregard, it's important to note that at any given moment, Georgia only has one recruiting strategy. It only has one set of recruiting priorities. And that strategy, those priorities, are going to be reflected over multiple years' worth of work. They're not just having the present tense conversation about the guys in the current class. They're thinking about all of these guys on a board that could stretch over the course of multiple years. And when we go back and look at what kind of the last year or so has looked like for Georgia, here's where I think you get really, really specific about just how much of a priority that Jared Curtis has really been for Georgia. And I want to make a comparison here between Curtis and another quarterback prospect. And it's not my intent to sort of disparage this guy or anything like that. I'm just sort of pointing out some things that are obvious in retrospect that may not have been quite so clear at the time. Do you remember, for instance, when a year or so ago, last couple of years, we might would have talked a lot about the 5-star quarterback at the time from the state of Georgia, Julian Juju Lewis, who for a good long while was committed to USC, was one of the more heralded prospects in the state in recent memory. At one point in time, ESPN kind of ranked him as the top recruit of any class anywhere in America. They gave him a lot of prestige because of that. He was a very good quarterback even from the beginning of his career as a freshman there at Carrollton, and so therefore he got a lot of attention. But for whatever reason, and I think now we have a little bit more idea about what this reason was, for whatever reason, even though Lewis was the big guy in this state, Lewis's relationship with Georgia was always just seemingly a little lukewarm. Am I saying that in a way that you would disagree with? It just sort of seems like that that Lewis and Georgia had a relationship, but it was not necessarily a rock solid, stronger than oak type relationship. And I want to kind of walk through the timeline on this just a little bit. And as we do so, I think it'll be obvious to you that, the reason why this is going on is because even back then, Curtis was the priority for Georgia. And the reason why he doesn't need to make one more final pitch to Curtis this weekend ahead of the announcement here tonight is because Curtis has sort of always been Georgia's guy. So let's talk about this just for a little bit. Go back to March 17th of a year ago. Julian Juju Lewis, who was kind of the big name in the current class, had reclassified from 2026 to 2025, but in state, he was the big name. He was committed to USC, but after some scuttlebutt here, Jeff Sentell reported on March 17th of 2025, of 2024, that on May 31st of that year, Julian Juju Lewis would take an official visit to Georgia. This was at one point in time not a given that Lewis would definitely take that official visit, given the fact he was committed to USC. But on March 17th of last year, Jeff reported that Lewis would do that this summer. And there was a story that following week at DawgNation.com that kind of discussed the process the Lewis family was going through to be ready for the official visit and their final college decision, and included a very interesting quote from Lewis's father. I want to read this to you. Jeff writing that it may not be, this is from DawgNation.com last March, that the eventual fit would be here at Georgia, but Jeff asked, does Lewis already know that Georgia would be a good fit for his son's career? Now, this is Julian Juju Lewis's father quoted at DawgNation.com, saying at the time, but the fit for Georgia, yeah, for sure. He says there's definitely a fit. It's a scheme fit, the system, all of it. Coaching staff fit, it's a roster fit. He says the roster is in a good spot for us right now. You just wonder if it stays that way. But then he goes on to say this. This is Julian Lewis's father at DawgNation.com last March. He says, I can't see, he calls his son Juju, I can't see Juju going the way of Carson Beck and sitting for 3 years. That kind of thing. That's what Julian Lewis's father told DawgNation.com last March. This was right after Jeff had reported that Lewis would take an official visit to Georgia on May 31st, that Georgia was going to get its crack at the best quarterback in state, but Lewis's camp, led by his father, making it very clear to DawgNation, but we are watching what's happening with other quarterbacks. Are we going to come here and play right away? Are we going to be asked to sit? They were examining very closely the level of quarterback depth that was taking place at Georgia. And if Georgia's priority was Julian Juju Lewis, then it would certainly stand to reason they would do everything they could to make him feel like the priority between that moment in March and when he would take his official visit on May 31st. But that's not what happened. A week after Lewis's father told Jeff Sentell that at DawgNation.com, Georgia took the quarterback commitment from the five-star from the class of 2026, Jared Curtis. That's when Curtis initially made his pledge to Georgia. And the interesting thing about that was at one point in time, Curtis and Lewis were both in the class of 2026. Lewis reclassified. Lewis was seemingly trying to move closer to Georgia. Georgia was happy to let Lewis take the official visit. But prior to that official visit, Georgia took the commitment of Curtis. You had the Lewis camp saying, we're not coming here to wait. We're not coming here to sit. We want to play right away. Georgia saying, that's fine and well, but we're going to take the quarterback commitment from Jared Curtis, kind of putting Curtis on the shelf in front of where Julian Lewis would have been. Not to disparage Lewis, but there are decisions in life that establish priorities, and Georgia showed at that moment its priority was Jared Curtis. And shortly after Curtis made that commitment in March of 2024, this is what he told our Jeff Sentell about that decision.
Yes, sir. Just the stability in the coaching staff, and knowing Coach Smart and Coach Bobo aren't going anywhere. And those are my two biggest connections at UGA, and just getting to build a connection with them is always special. I was talking to Coach Smart a little bit before practice, like 20 minutes in his office, and it all went good and stuff. And I told Coach Bobo and Coach Gummy like 5 minutes after I got out of his office that I was wanting to commit, and they was really happy for me. And I was like, so how should I tell Coach Smart? And they was like, you just go up to him, say, hey, you want to be a Dawg, and go Dawgs. And then that's that. And I was like, so that's pretty much what I've done.
So that was that, but as you know, that was only that at the time. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here doing all this here today. The commitment that Curtis made in March of last year did not last. By October, he was already decommitting from Georgia. But even though at face value that's not necessarily good news, I do think it kind of furthers the discussion of why Georgia thinks it's in a good place for Curtis here right now. And once again, you got to kind of compare this to the timeline involving Julian Juju Lewis to fully understand all of this. So Curtis decommits from Georgia on October 17th. Shortly after that, we find out, now, back on the open market again. He wants to sort of play the field a little bit. Georgia's kind of also in the open market too. And then we learn that Julian Juju Lewis, shortly after the decommitment of Jared Curtis, is going to take an unofficial visit to Georgia for the Tennessee game. Was still committed to USC, but now Lewis, most high-profile, quarterback, arguably in the class of 2025, at least among them, is going to take an unofficial visit to Georgia for the Tennessee game. This is once again a chance for Georgia, after being spun by Curtis and having some NIL dollars to play with, at least in theory, to kind of go all in on Julian Juju Lewis, with Lewis showing up on campus for the big atmosphere, the night game against Tennessee. But if you'll remember, that's not what happened. Lewis was there, but Jared Curtis was also there too. And while Lewis no doubt got his FaceTime with the Georgia coaches, Jared Curtis also got a lot of FaceTime as well, even though he had just decommitted from Georgia, and even though Georgia had its crack at Julian Lewis, who, by the way, now remember this, Lewis also that weekend, while in Athens for the Georgia-Tennessee game, Lewis decommitted from USC. So you had the moment where Lewis is clearly trying to stir it up with his recruitment. It's obvious he didn't want to go to USC, but he couldn't quite get, I'm not saying this to disparage him, I'm just calling it as it was, seemingly could not get the interest from Georgia he wanted to get, even after decommitting from USC while he was here in Athens. And why wasn't he getting all of the attention he perhaps would have liked to have gotten from Georgia? Because Jared Curtis was still getting that attention. Even after decommitting from Georgia in October, he visited the Dawgs again, same weekend as Lewis, in November for that Tennessee game. And I'll show you the story from DawgNation.com here, where Curtis made it very clear. The quote was in the headline: "I'm still interested in Georgia as long as they are interested in me." And to give you an idea of how interested Georgia was in Curtis at the time, the quote from Jared to DawgNation was that he got to talk to the Georgia coaches once again during that trip for the Tennessee game. He says, "We mostly didn't talk about football. We just got to know each other a little bit more, talking more about the daily basis and a little bit about their practice schedule and how that is, and just like that. Just to go over there and talk to them, that is always exciting." So here you have a situation where a five-star quarterback like Julian Lewis is on your campus. He wants to decommit from USC while he's here. He's clearly interested in what you might have to offer, but the Georgia coaching staff still spent time just sort of chewing the fat with Jared Curtis. Not talking NIL, not making the pitch of here's how much we need you, just talking about life, what practice is like, what campus is like, life is like, as Curtis himself described, just kind of getting to know each other better. Now, all of that at the time maybe didn't seem quite as significant as it perhaps should here right now. But to me, let me tell you what all this adds up to. It adds up to what almost certainly was the final pitch for Georgia to Jared Curtis. You have always been our guy. Going back to when you first kind of popped up a long time ago, emerging the class of 2026, and even when the whole world was talking about Julian Juju Lewis, We were in constant contact with you. You have been our guy. Now, in the age in which we currently live, none of us are naive. We know that alone is not enough to win the argument. We live in the NIL age. Compensation is obviously a part of this. But we have every reason to believe that Georgia, if it's not the biggest offer of them all, is certainly competitive with the other offers that are on the table for Curtis, that the offer is at least competitive. But what do you have in addition to the compensation offer? What do you have in addition to the money? Georgia would say we have a deep and long-standing relationship with you. Our roots run deep because we have been on you even at the expense of other quarterback recruitments. You've been our guy now for multiple years. I do believe later on this evening that, in part, might be enough to win the Jared Curtis sweepstakes here for Georgia. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We are happy you're with us, whether it's live on video 10 a.m. or on demand on video after that. Many of you tuning in after the fact to watch the show. We certainly appreciate that. Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 Ref, podcasts wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just thrilled to have you as a part of the program today and looking forward to live coverage of the Jared Curtis announcement with you later on this evening, trying to set the stage for all of that here right now. And, of course, we appreciate our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia who make it all possible for you here today. You know, our friends at Pella Window, it's a great time to think about the folks from Pella here right now because we're obviously in that time of year in which people are just kind of thinking about that thing, taking good care of their house. Kind of a spring cleaning time of year, but as you're kind of doing a lot of that kind of stuff, one of the things that you probably, start to examine is, hey, what around my house needs a little bit of an upgrade? What do I need to perhaps, kind of take the time to make sure it's as nice and technologically advanced as it can possibly be? Well, that's where our friends at Pella kind of come in here. And I've seen this firsthand. I've been out and about with the folks at Pella, seen them in person as they're doing various things and, working with the public here, and really have been able to kind of put my hand on that Pella product and really recognize what makes it different than anything else. And you get your chance to do that too. I want you to find them online. It's PellaGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaGA.com/DawgNation. Also a great phone number you can call. How about 678-638-1429? That's 678-638-1429. You can reach out to them today and be a part of what is an awesome opportunity for you to take advantage of the great new technology that Pella is really kind of championed when it comes to its windows and celebrate. You can kind of see all that. You can also kind of get out and see them in person a lot too. One of the things they do this time of year, they're out and about in the public. They're making sure you get a chance to sort of meet them and find out why they're friendly folks and just really love what they do. They love the product they sell. They love the way in which it gives chance for people to benefit their homes. And I want you to check them out. You can, in fact, see them this upcoming Thursday. That's May 8th at the Dunwoody Arts Festival. Of course, there'll be the Taste of Alpharetta this Thursday, May 8th. And then coming up this weekend at the Dunwoody Arts Festival, May 10th and 11th. So great chance for you to see all the great stuff going on with our friends at Pella. One more time, it's PellaGA.com/DawgNation, or give them a call, 678-638-1429. Thursday at the Taste of Alpharetta event, and of course this weekend at the Dunwoody Arts Festival. Find out what makes Pella different. Find out what makes them better. And you can check that out today and enjoy the great opportunity you have with our friends at Pella Window and Door. All right, we're going to have Jon Stinchcomb here coming up in a moment. More of the talk about Jared Curtis coming up with John here in just a second. Prior to that, though, I want to go around the doghouse. And I want to shift the conversation with Jared Curtis to this. What happens if Curtis chooses Georgia? What then? And this kind of goes back to something that Jeff Sintel and I were talking about a little bit on Friday, is that I think, and I get where some of this comes from, but I do think we've almost reached a level where there's a degree of overthinking that goes on with a quarterback like this, that something about recruiting in this era almost ends up feeling a little more, a little riskier than perhaps some of these, types of decisions have felt like in the past. Like in the Kirby Smart era, even like you will kind of think of as the true modern era and just the Kirby Smart era alone, that every recruiting decision felt I guess, somewhat diminished because there was always another 5-star to get. That you could get this guy, maybe he pans out, maybe he doesn't, but there's always going to be another guy right after that getting ready to make his decision, and you could stack these elite prospects one on top of the other. At a time, even at the quarterback position, there was some of that going on around college football. So therefore, you didn't feel an incredible level of pressure to kind of win every recruiting battle or even to have every recruit that you won with kind of pan out, because there was always another one, and the very best programs were hoarding elite talent. We got to the point where, the top national championship contenders, the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Ohio States, darn near 75, 80% of their roster, as compiled by our buddy Bud Elliott, would be like former 4- and 5-star players. That's just how elite the talent level at the kind of the main championship contenders was. Therefore, every individual recruiting decision, the actual meaning of that and the stakes of that would be diminished because there were just so many opportunities for these elite programs to win. In the NIL age, though, and perhaps also kind of influenced by the transfer portal, it seems like the stakes of the various recruiting battles have kind of gone up a little bit. Not only do you need to win more of them because the talent sort of spreading itself out in a way that it perhaps didn't always do. Now that the compensation part of this has been highlighted so much, and we know it's large sums of money, I do think it makes some fans a little bit nervous. And you start to think, well, do you really want the 5-star quarterback? Would you be better using that money towards this and towards that? And is this guy going to be really as good as that guy? And what about the fact that some of Georgia's 5-stars haven't always panned out, and the walk-on's the guy that won 2 national championships? Do you really want to do this? As I told Jeff on Friday on our show, I want to not contributing to that overthinking. Have you ever heard the phrase, I don't want paralysis by analysis? My simple answer to the question is yes, if you have a chance to get a 5-star quarterback, if you have a chance to get what at least, some of the national websites will tell you is the top quarterback in the country, if you have your chance to get that guy, yes, you do want to get him. And it's not because you're guaranteed that he's going to be a success. The truth is, none of these guys are a guarantee. And this kind of goes back to something we've talked about a lot in the past, that when you get the smartest kind of player evaluators, personnel men, scouts, you put them in a room, those people, whether they're looking at high school recruits or prospective NFL draft picks, they are going to be very good at putting those players into categories. The category of who should be a 5-star, the category of who should be a 4-star, the category of who might be below that. They are very good at dividing prospects into categories. But I would suggest that nobody is necessarily better than anyone else when it comes to identifying an individual player within that category that's guaranteed to be a success. That's just not how things work. It is always going to be, what's the Matthew McConaughey line from The Wolf of Wall Street, that when it comes to picking stocks, whether you're Warren Buffett, whether you're Jimmy Buffett, nobody knows if a stock's going to go up or down. Well, if you think about some of these players like they are stocks, like they are commodities, I'd say the same thing is true. That you may know the category of this type of player just looks more likely to succeed than another type of player, but within that category, once again, every opinion is about a 50-50 proposition. Every one of those prospects within that category of 5-star is about as likely to succeed as not. All of this is going to play out as frequently as chance would dictate. And if you don't believe me on this, I want to play a clip for you. This is coming from a guy named Eric DeCosta, who is the general manager of the Baltimore Ravens. And he was talking about the Ravens draft philosophy. And a lot of this is sort of centering around why the Ravens don't like to trade up into the NFL draft. Some of the Falcons apparently do not adhere to. But the point of playing the clip has nothing to do with making NFL trades. What it's really all about is even a guy who does this for a living acknowledges that his ability to identify a player who's going to be great compared to a player who might not kind of thrive the same way, there is a great deal of luck involved in this. This is fascinating for one of the better GMs in the NFL. I think the context of this, even though he's not talking about quarterback and he's certainly not talking about Jared Curtis specifically, the context of this and the humility that he speaks about his job picking players and deciding which ones will succeed, important for us to consider as we go through Jared Curtis day to day. This is DaCosta, GM of the Baltimore Ravens.
Teams simply don't do any better drafting than anyone else. You're all going to be about the same, right? So the idea that you're going to trade up, and basically that the draft is inherently sort of a luck-driven process. Now, I don't believe that, but there is an element of luck involved. So if you think about that and if you accept that premise, then you're trading up for a player that you think is better than anyone else, right? And you think that team's going to draft him.
Right.
But most of the time, they're not going to draft that player. And so what we've seen over the years is that player is probably going to fall to you. Could he be selected? Yes. But there's no guarantees that player is going to be better than the player that you end up getting.
Yeah.
So they call it the loser's curse because the team at the top, it's like, oh, he's got the first pick in the draft. Well, you know what? The player that they select, we've seen this many times. There's no guarantees that player is going to be better than the player that gets selected at 25 or 30 in the first round. And so all things being equal, I know I'm doing a lot of talking about this, but it's a passion of mine. All things being equal, right? The fact that no one really knows who's going to be better than anyone else, the only rational approach is to get more at-bats, is to pick more.
That's Eric DaCosta, Ravens general manager. I think it's fascinating. This is a guy who picks players for a living. He says there's an element of luck here. And this assumption that you know who's going to succeed and who's not, you can forget that it simply comes down to make as many draft picks as you can in the hope you collect good players that way. And that's what DaCosta is saying about the guys that he's picking for the Ravens. We have to keep that in mind, too, with a guy like Jared Curtis. Maybe he'll succeed and be great, and maybe he won't. But either way, if you have your chance of getting the five-star quarterback, you want to get him. And the money you have to pay to get him, listen, in this day and age, that's actually not even that interesting to me anymore because that money, you'd be using that for a different player. And if Curtis doesn't get that money from Georgia, he's going to get it from somebody else. The money now is just simply the cost of doing business. And you get him, you bring him in, you try to make the best quarterback you can out of him. And if it doesn't work, you just sort of move on to the next one. But you can't assume that any of this, whether it be Curtis or a different player, is some sort of known commodity, some sort of guarantee, because none of this is. But just because you can't be for certain it's going to work, it also shouldn't scare you off of making the decision. If you want to play at the highest level, especially in this age in which we live in now where schedules have gotten tougher and the challenge is so great, you got to have a good quarterback to succeed. It seems like Georgia thinks it's targeted one with Jared Curtis, and we'll find out later on tonight if Curtis wants to sign up to be a part of this here at UGA. And that's Around the Doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And, of course, longtime friends of ours here, big part of our Dog Nation cruise a couple of weeks ago. And when it comes to college football and all the things we enjoy, it's a Pepper thing. That means you're watching the game day, the games on game day in the fall. You got those Dr. Pepper commercials rolling throughout the afternoon, or when you're getting ready to enjoy your own game day experience. Of course, we know the rich one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper is a part of that. And great time to also enjoy right now the brand new Dr. Pepper Blackberry, the Dr. Pepper Blackberry Zero Sugar, fun new flavor innovation from our friends at Dr. Pepper. All of it really delicious. They're really, really clever and creative with all of these flavor offerings. And we think you're going to love Dr. Pepper Blackberry and Dr. Pepper Blackberry Zero Sugar. So make it a big part of all the get-togethers you're doing here this summer. I think you'll be really glad you did that. We are certainly glad to have Dr. Pepper as a part of Around the Doghouse because when it comes to that and us, it is certainly a Pepper thing here on DawgNation Daily. All right, so I've talked plenty. I'm way late here. Let me find out what Jon Stinchcomb thinks about all of this. Big day for Georgia, trying to make a move here with a five-star quarterback. Second chance, the guy that decommitted the first time. Let's find out what it's all about here. Jon Stinchcomb here today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I am very late getting to Jon Stinchcomb, and I apologize for that, both for the audience that wants to hear him and for Jon's time as well. But, Jon, it's five-star quarterback Jared Curtis, decision day today. It's kind of a big day for Georgia. But as we were just talking about when it comes to the Ravens general manager, what he says about his own selections, a big day here is not happening because we know for a fact that Curtis is going to succeed and go on himself to be a first-round pick. He might. He's been compared to Matthew Stafford. Maybe he'll be just as good. But that can't be guaranteed because these sorts of things don't always work out. Even if he picks Georgia, not a guarantee that he'll be successful. And yet at the same time, as I told our Jeff Sintel on Friday, still want him. You still want your crack at making him everything he can be and unearthing the potential that's there. You don't want to overthink this. If you've got your chance to get the 5-star quarterback, kind of no matter how much it costs, because Georgia's theoretically at least got the money, if you got your chance to bring this guy in, you do want to do it, right?
Absolutely. I'll take a 5-star quarterback coming to Athens any day of the week, especially when it's not just the rankings from third parties. This is the coveted player that Georgia has targeted. They want Jared Curtis to be a part of this program. And, it's always eye of the beholder, but there's a reason why he's a 5-star player. I think you watch his tape and you'd be able to recognize pretty quickly he's got the skill set and the tools that any coach would covet to work with. And, it's everyone thinks they're the best artist. And when you've got a nice piece of clay to work with, you feel like you can make something special. And that's what you have with these players. And Georgia has done a phenomenal job of identifying talent. Now, specifically with quarterbacks, we just had the draft a couple of weeks ago, and you see that only 2 of the drafted quarterbacks stayed at one program their entire time in college. So obviously shifting landscape. If you miss on a guy, it's not end of the world. But today's a big day. It's a great opportunity to kind of fortify this next class and have that anchor player that starts to be the bell cow that you rally around. I know there's another announcement coming up next week for another 5-star player, an offensive lineman that would be highly coveted, and anyone would be very excited to have a part of their program. So it is important. I think it's fun to watch. I think it's not make or break, but when you have an opportunity to get a player of Curtis's caliber committed and coming to Georgia, that's a big thing.
I mentioned this before, that I almost feel like there's a degree of nervousness on the part of this with Georgia fans, not just the anxiousness of, will he choose Georgia or not, but the anxiousness of, is this the right path for Georgia to take here? And I think some of that probably stems around, in some respects, this feels like a little bit different than the way that Kirby Smart has sometimes chosen to do his business. I don't know if that's completely true or not, but that's the perception I think that some have of, kind of going after the sort of, high dollar recruit this way. It sort of seems like Georgia's been a little bit more, bricks and mortar than that in the past. But, John, my theory is, and you can tell me if you think this is, correct or not, I think that Kirby Smart is very realistic when you look at the landscape of what college football currently is right now. The SEC schedules are just tougher than they used to be. The playoff is now longer. The competition that kind of stands between you and additional national championships, it just seems like for right now at the top end of the sport, it's just more intense. And so therefore, I do think that you've got to be a little bit more willing to kind of pull out all stops and kind of be firing on all cylinders, to mix a whole bunch of metaphors. I just think you've got to be more, you just got to be deeper at every position than maybe that you felt like you need to be in the past. And so if that takes spending an awful lot of money on a quarterback coming out of high school so that you can be even better at quarterback than maybe you've been in the past, I think the current landscape of the sport perhaps dictates that, demands that, if you want to stay competitive at the championship level. The schedules, the depth of the playoff, the longer season. Do you agree with that?
I agree with the fact that when you look at resource allocation, Georgia has done a great job of figuring out where to go above and beyond. I think you've kind of look at it and you understand you probably can't create the depth that you could years ago. And if you're going to seek after specific players, and it's going to require more resources, specifically we're talking about NIL money and the like, then it needs to be someone that fits the identity of your program. And I think that's what Coach Smart talks about more than anything, is whether it's transfer portal, whether it's recruitment of players, sure, they're looking for talent, but they're also looking for guys that are willing to work, that are looking to improve and push each other and compete. Practices at Georgia are not easy, so it's not for everyone. And when you identify a player that has those skills and fits the profile, the character profile, to be a part of your program that you can build around, then it's a little bit easier for you to say we can allocate more assets to bring in this type player because it's going to help our entire program. I think there's other players that are probably skilled that programs would look at. You watch their film and you go, man, they can play, but yet they might not fit that locker room dynamic that you're trying to create as well, and you'd be a little more hesitant to pull the trigger. He just played a clip from a GM for the NFL. They do that constantly. Not only is it an evaluation of talent, and some teams are more willing to take those risks. I think you can look back at, I hate to point fingers, but Cincinnati in years past, they've been willing to take risks on guys that, you know, are high-end, performance players on the field and might be a little more at risk off it. And that's the same situation happening in college athletics, where they're going, we're willing to take those risks because of what they could bring to the football field. I don't think Georgia has taken that, despite the fact that, you know, the narrative has been a little bit of, you know, the arrests that have happened in these past few years, and most of them are driving related. I know I'm off on a tangent, but I think it fits a bigger picture. I think when you look at the type players that Georgia brings in, character and what they are going to offer, really the entire department, the entire school is a part of that equation.
I think that's interesting. There's obviously been a lot of talk about the NIL and what people would sort of assume that would be for a guy like Curtis. Jon, it's almost getting to the point now where I'm losing interest in that type of thing. Or the dollar figure is this much. You know, I'm assuming at least, you know, it's directionally accurate, if not specifically accurate, that I'm sure it's a lot of money. But I'm also of the belief that if Georgia didn't spend this money on Curtis, they'd be spending that money on another player, and it very likely could also be a quarterback. And then if Curtis didn't get this money from Georgia, he was just going to get it from somewhere else. That we're sort of getting to the point where this is just the cost of doing business. And whether that, let's say it's, you know, multiple, you know, millions, you know, that money either ends up being well spent or you kind of end up having the regret for it. But either way, you dust yourself off. You just sort of get ready to do it again after that. That, you know, I just think we live in an age, I don't really know where the money's coming from, and I don't really know how long this, like, you know, faucet of money is going to stay turned on. But for a while it's here, Georgia seems to be, you know, they're not the biggest spending team in college football, but they're also not paupers either. That, you know, this is just what it takes to compete, and Georgia's obviously in it to win it. And so, therefore, you know, they're going to have, you know, big-time compensation packages here too. I'm actually a little less interested in the individual NIL figure for a guy like Curtis than maybe I used to be, because everybody's just sort of doing it the same way right now.
Yeah, they are doing it the same way, and you have to spend, but they're, as you alluded to, not all teams and NIL packages are created equal. And I think Georgia has done a great job of trying to be judicious with the resources that they have available. And they continue to try to cultivate that and make sure that they are competitive. And that's why I think Georgia is able to continue to sustain the roster that they have through this very turbulent era, where some teams are willing to throw bukus of dollars at players and then just kind of figure it out after the fact. I think you look at Texas A&M a few years ago, and whether or not those numbers were real, the fact that there was a lot of money being put into a recruiting class that did not pan out is a cautionary tale for any program, that you can't just buy your way into relevance. And I think players on the other side of that coin are recognizing, I don't need to just chase after the highest figure that I can get from that NIL initial package. I'm looking for this to be long-term. The players that Georgia are recruiting are planning on playing professionally. And so when you consider that, if as long as it's a competitive number for all of the top programs, which I think it pretty much is, then you're going, I might be willing to take a little less, or I'm still looking for a little more, knowing that I want to be a part of a program that can get me to where I want to go. Georgia has proven time and time and time again that they are able to get players that are willing to work, willing to put in the time to where they want to go. And, you know, this past April proves that yet again, with the number one school represented in the NFL draft. And so I think that is part of the equation for the players. It's not just money, but it is a factor. It is a part of doing business. Every team has a salary cap, if you will. They are not all equal. Some teams are able to spend more, and so far that hasn't instantly equaled wins, but it's undeniable that Ohio State was able to add some pretty key resources this past year, and it affected their ability to win national championships. So it's a part of the equation. It's not going away. It continues to change, but it's just part of the equation, not the only number that's being entered in.
Yeah, let me make sure I choose my words carefully here, because I think some people will probably scream with their device based on what I just said. That what I believe is that Georgia and Oregon and whatever other teams could have maybe been on the periphery of this, that they're all within the same sort of ballpark offer. There's no way I think that Georgia's significantly below these other offers. Otherwise, they wouldn't be one of the finalists here right now. But I think the world in which a lot of fans assume is true, and I don't have any reason to dispute this either, that if somewhere before 5:30 p.m. Eastern time tonight, there is a game-changing counteroffer made that greatly increases the compensation offer that was on the table, that it's more likely to come from Oregon than Georgia. That's what I think that most Georgia fans probably believe is true, and I don't have a reason to dispute that. I think that right now, both sides are in kind of a similar position. Georgia may not be the biggest offer of all, but it's going to be at least in the ballpark. But if some big 11th hour thing comes in, I think conventional wisdom would lead you to believe that comes from Oregon and not Georgia. Is that kind of similar to your thinking, John?
Yeah, I think that's I think that's how I would see it. But I would say this: we're not close to the 11th hour. I think we saw in even this past recruiting cycle with guys like Justice Terry that are willing to, wait to signing day and see what that market is, and still make quote unquote business decisions based on what's available. And I'm not hating on him. I recognize that there's an opportunity that is unique right now in college football specifically, that guys are given or have earned opportunities to consider 6 and sometimes 7-figure paydays and contracts with certain teams and schools. And you're going, I get it. So I'm not sure this is the 11th hour. This is commitment day. Yeah. And there's a long time between commitment day and signing day, and a lot can happen. But I don't foresee any 11th hour last minute offers coming from Georgia or even Oregon in this situation, because there's still a lot of time left, and you probably have already tried to present your best package and best foot forward.
Last thing I'll say about NIL, then I want to ask you about something different, which is, once again, I don't know this to be true. I just sort of assume it's true, that we're moving into a world in which you've got the revenue sharing payments to players coming from the athletic departments themselves. And in addition to that, you've got kind of a supplement to that through what we think of as sort of traditional NIL. And at least in theory, those deals are supposed to be scrutinized for fair market value. We'll find out how much that actually occurs in the future. But that's what the written, I think, policy is going to be once all of this is agreed to. But with that as kind of the framework, my theory is, and you can tell me as a businessman if you think this is probably true, which is if you're trying to pass the hat for NIL to pay a player on top of the revenue sharing stuff that's in place, I think it's a lot easier to go to people for a quarterback than it is another position. That there's a little bit of a kind of an emotional buy there of, hey, would you like to help us secure a 5-star quarterback? I think it's a little easier to get to yes with businessman, booster, kind of whatever else, kind of outside the revenue sharing parameters than it might be. Not to say the other positions aren't important, but if it's linebacker, tight end, safety, something like that, I think that you can kind of get the rich guy to open up the wallet for quarterback in a way that you might not be able to for some of the other positions. You assume that may be true?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it really is obviously quarterback and anyone with stats that, somebody can be impressive. They want to be affiliated with that. And with that said, my understanding is Deloitte's kind of going to be the gatekeeper, that there is going to be a clearinghouse, if you will, for third-party direct marketing deals for players. And in addition to what's through the school and the collective and the rev sharing, if a player is going to get one-on-one, business 2-player contracts, that there is going to be someone looking through it and say it's got to be a real marketing deal, an NIL as it was supposed to be, contract between a company and their representative. And, how that plays out, still to be determined. But it will be a factor, and you can market quarterbacks better. And you look at different markets, and Athens or Georgia is probably a different market than Oregon, and some of their companies that are affiliated with the schools, those factor in. But, I think that's still down the road and yet to be determined, especially considering there's still, negotiations that are happening with this House hearing and what that will finally look like. So, trying to figure that out now, I think is a fool's errand. I think all the ones that are really involved are trying to figure out contingencies as to what might happen. But I'm certainly not in a seat where I'm going to try to juggle through and determine what the powers that be and how they're going to decide which direction to go with it. That's going to be a tough chore given the landscape and how much it changes on a seems like weekly basis.
Let me finish with this. We started the show today by saying that Curtis was supposed to have one additional in-home visit by both coaching staffs prior to making the announcement here today, but kind of said we don't need to do that. Both coaching staffs, Mike Bobo and the Oregon offensive coordinator, had been in to see him last week. As a former elite recruit yourself, how important were those in-home visits for you? Different era in that now a lot of the in-home stuff ends up being about the social media photo. Obviously back then, kind of pre-social media for you as a recruit. But how much did you and your family value the time with coaches on your turf before you made a college decision?
Yeah, I mean, anyone likes to feel important. And I think that is part of what this offers is, hey, the coach of this entire program is taking time out to come visit me. I'm important to him. I feel valued. There's good opportunity there for me. I think it is important. It's good for the family to see as well, because usually it's parents, relatives in that room that also want to make sure that their baby is going to be valued the way that they see him. And usually it's, I've got the best player in the world living in my house. So the fact that someone else of that I respect and is the head of their program comes and shows that same valuation of someone I love dearly, it matters. So these home visits, they are important. It does send a message. And, I think it does matter in that player's eyes as well as the family's eyes.
So did y'all do the posing for the pictures thing back then? I mean, I'm older than you are, so I'm by no means taking a shot at your age. But, this is pre-social media for you. Now it's like you snap the photo, it's up there on, Twitter or Instagram or something like that. I mean, in 2000,
98.
98, yeah.
So I signed.
So I'm guessing if you take the photo, then you have to send it to like Walmart to get the to get it like what do you call it?
Oh yeah, got a shoebox full of them. BA. That's so good. I mean, does it really matter? No, I wasn't. Wasn't posted to social media, but somehow it finds a way to trickle through your school, and it makes you feel pretty good about it. School visits are important too.
That's
right. I get to leave class and everyone in the school knows that I'm going to talk to Coach Smart and he's here to see me. Those feel pretty good. Or a helicopter landing on your football field. But, those are the kind of moments that you feel valued and the importance. And, it's every player that says, he really showed me the love. It just, it's a little bit of an ego boost. And what's funny is, then you sign your name to that commitment letter and you get on campus and you go through that first practice and you realize as the coach is climbing your tree and yelling at you and you're maybe not that God's gift to the game that you thought you were going to be, at least not instantly, but there's a lot of work left. And almost every player on that roster had that same treatment. It's also a humbling experience only a few months down the road. So enjoy it while it lasts.
Jon, fascinating stuff. I appreciate your time, and certainly we'll look forward to talking a whole lot more about recruits that do choose Georgia, whatever happens next, whatever Curtis decides to do. It's going to be a really fun and interesting summer. We appreciate your insight today. Thank you for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
Always enjoy it, BA. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Great stuff from Jon Stinchcomb. Of course, don't forget, we got live coverage this evening, 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. Just before that, we'll come on the air. We'll show you the scene from Tennessee near Nashville where Jared Curtis makes that college choice. And as I told you, just given the deep roots the Georgia relationship, seemingly had with Curtis, I'm sort of expecting it to be Georgia for Curtis today. We'll find out live on video. But as I say that, we've also done these shows in the past. It's Terry, first crack at KJ Bolden, first crack at CJ Wiley. I have sat at this desk a few times in recent years, left sort of mouth open in surprise when a player didn't choose UGA. If that's the way it goes down for Curtis today, of course, all of this presented by Kroger, by the way. If that's the way that it goes down with Curtis today, I won't be quite mouth open surprised. We're always on guard for anything. But that's sort of the deal there. Then, of course, don't forget Cody Chafin's Mike Griffith on the beat later on this evening. They will have additional reaction to whatever goes down with Jared Curtis. Prior to that, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And, boy, we're getting excited about really fun new things for Royal Caribbean here in 2025. Star of the Seas debuts later on this summer. But the time to act right now for our DawgNation cruise in 2026. Because even though you may be thinking about 2025 travel, it is not too soon to think about this for 2026 as well. And this, by the way, is true no matter what kind of Royal Caribbean cruise vacation you want to take. I saw one of they have like a shareholder earnings call thing the other day. The CEO says 86% of all the staterooms for Royal Caribbean are already filled for the rest of the year. This is one of those propositions where Royal Caribbean is just a really hot commodity right now, and cruises are booking up fast. So whether it be our DawgNation cruise or kind of really anything, the time to think about that to get the best possible experience and certainly the best possible price is, especially for other cruises other than ours, is as soon as you know you want to travel. That's the best way to get the best savings on all of this. And so, our allotment of staterooms for our DawgNation cruise, it goes fast. And so we've already booked so many of these, and I want you to have your chance to be a part of that too. So give Jessica Slater, wonderful travel advisor, a call. She's specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean for all of your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation needs. Check her out, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com, and you can be a part of an awesome Royal Caribbean cruise vacation experience, including our DawgNation cruise coming up in 2026. We cannot wait to see you there for all of that. All right. I want to go cruise around the SEC, but I want to start with something that's only kind of loosely related to the SEC. This, I think, is a very, very weird story. So it starts off in the world of academics, where it looks like the University of Michigan president, his name is Santa J. Ono, no relationship to Santa Claus, I don't believe, but Santa J. Ono is reportedly leaving Michigan to take the same job at Florida. The Florida president thing has been a mess. We won't get into all that. But the Michigan president leaving for Florida, in academic circles, this would be considered a pretty big surprise because, oh my gosh, the people from Michigan, what they think of themselves as an academic bastion of Michigan, just the highest, the Harvard of the public schools and all that, nonsense that I don't care one iota about. That stuff like that doesn't move me 1 inch. But nonetheless, it's a huge deal to them up there. They just think the highest of them. And the idea that the Michigan president would leave for Florida, in academic circles, this is a pretty big deal. It leaves you to wonder, well, what's going on here? Frankly, we don't necessarily, we're not the academic beat. We're not going to talk about research grants and things like that. But to the extent that this starts to relate to athletics, here's where things get interesting. Certainly seems like, I'm not saying this is the reason that Ono is leaving, but the timing of this is at least going to be, maybe suspicious. At best, it's coincidental with the fact that there are still a lot of lingering questions about what exactly happened during the sign-stealing fiasco in Jim Harbaugh's last year as Michigan head coach, resulting in a national championship. But boy, the lingering effects of that don't seem to be going away. There's new reporting out there now that this upcoming fall, Sharon Moore, the new Michigan head coach going into his second year, is going to be suspended for 2 games, dating back to his kind of, involvement in all of this. Now, ironically, it's not the first 2 games because one of those, There's going to be a bigger game. They're going to do like game 3, game 4 against lesser competition, which is just, so gross. But nonetheless, Michigan is still dealing with the sign-stealing allegations, so much so that there are reports out there this week, today, that Sharon Moore going to be suspended for 2 games in the 2025 season. Jim Harbaugh was suspended 2 different times for 2 different things in 2023. And now you've got the Michigan president, who, I'm not saying he's leaving because of this, but it is fair to point out, seemed to sort of slow walk every aspect of this investigation the entire way. And now he's sort of leaving for what might be greener pastures at Florida, leaving the university itself to deal with the after effect of what it might have done, compromising its integrity, some would say, as a way of winning the 2023 national championship. I don't like any of this. I've said before, I do believe that Michigan cheated. I do believe the sign stealing was real. I do believe it helped. Otherwise, I don't think Michigan would have done it. And I do think it's just downright despicable that they got away with it every step of the way. The College Football Playoff Selection Committee showed no attempt to kind of question their status as a football team by the ill-gotten gain they may have leveraged for the success they had. Big Ten didn't do anything. NCAA has sort of kind of messed around a little bit with this, but at this point in time, that's essentially a feckless body. They have no real ability to render any kind of real significant punishment. And Michigan, and this is what ought to drive you crazy. This is what ought to drive. And frankly, if you need a new reason to be mad at Florida, this ought to make you mad at Florida. The fact they provide allegedly, potentially, a safe landing spot for what could soon be an embattled university president. How many years did those of us in the SEC have to be told by all these snooty Big Ten people, the SEC, they're just football factories down there. They don't care about integrity. They just cheat. We were accused. How many times did the collective we here in the SEC get accused of cheating all the time by all these Big Ten folks? Who are like, we would never stoop to that level. But when Michigan finally had a chance to have some actual football success, to my eyes, from a couple of hundred miles away, a few hundred miles away, it certainly seemed like they were willing to compromise anything and take whatever shortcut was necessary as a way of getting a national championship. And then now, almost anybody who was around and a part of that, Jim Harbaugh, soon to be university president perhaps, just running away from the whole thing and leaving the mess for somebody else to clean up, knowing that when you're powerful, you never have to say you're sorry. And in the world of college athletics, Michigan is a very, very powerful entity. And they did it because they could get away with it. And when it's time to clean up the mess, everybody just sort of runs off to a nice, safe landing spot and a brand new job, whether it be a new university president at Florida or a new head coach of the Chargers or whatever else. I think this is a messy situation. I don't think anyone's done nearly enough to fully investigate just how messy it actually is. I think that Michigan cheated to win a national championship, and I think they got away with it. But there is still some, lingering, mess to be cleaned up with all of that. So that's what's going on there. Like I said, none of this is, of course, on the record. We don't know, at least, why the Michigan president's leaving. But boy, oh boy, does that lead to some questions that I think need to be asked and questions that I think should, get answers. But I won't hold my breath that those ever come. Let me shift gears to this. I think a story that's been kind of interesting as of late is that of Quinn Ewers, the former Texas quarterback. We were pretty clear during the season. We didn't think that Quinn Ewers was anything special as a quarterback, unfortunately for him. But he's been in the spotlight as of late for a very different reason. Went to the NFL draft as opposed to transferring to a different school where theoretically it could have gotten paid big bucks to be a starting quarterback, a better position than what he'll have in the NFL right now as a late round draft pick. And a lot of people have sort of reported here that that Ewers made a big mistake by doing what he did. Could have taken the free agent dollars, could have gone and played somewhere else, and could have had just additional financial windfall before an NFL career that may or may not ever kind of really truly pan out for him. And look, I know as sports fans, we've all been conditioned to be pretty cynical. I'm no different than any of you on this. I do realize all of that. But I've always, in just the last few days, we've kind of become aware of this. I've taken the Ewers story kind of at face value. I have every reason to believe that what he said is true. I don't think Ewers wanted to play anywhere else but Texas. I think he saw himself as a Texas guy. I think he was proud to have been the Texas quarterback. Now I do realize he started off, going to Ohio State, but nonetheless, I think that Ewers saw himself as the Texas quarterback. I think that may have contributed to why Steve Sarkisian was loyal to him last season, when a lot of folks, myself included, sort of expected Arch Manning to potentially eventually get an opportunity. They stayed loyal to Ewers, and I think part of that was because I think they sensed how loyal Ewers was to them. And yeah, Ewers could have gotten a lot more money by playing somewhere else in 2025, but didn't want to. And sometimes, we're kind of getting used to like college football being this sort of new, fully formed kind of free market. Well, sometimes, the free market includes the freedom not to participate. And even though Ewers could have made a lot more money, the sense that I get is he just didn't really want to. There's new reporting out there, his agent kind of giving voice to the teams that would have been interested in having him. And, this was an option that he could have pursued. I don't think we need, the agent to tell us that to know that. I mean, Ewers would have had a market for his services, but he didn't want to. And I do think in this day and age in which everything seems to be about the dollars and the bottom line and the financial compensation, the fact that Quinn Ewers has sort of openly said, and I believe, I take him at his word that he's being honest, that he cared about things in addition to compensation, other than compensation. I think that's kind of nice. I think he deserves some credit for that. I'll also mention this, just kind of, we haven't done baseball in a while around here. I just wanted to mention a couple of baseball things. First of all, the same way that Texas, got gifted the easiest schedule in football, baseball's been kind of the same way. They have not really gone on the road very much this year. They did have to go to Fayetteville this weekend, and boy, did they run into a buzzsaw. Arkansas sweeps Texas here this weekend. Texas had not lost an SEC player prior to that. Had been just, really, very impressive. But Arkansas taking care of business against the Longhorns here this weekend. Very impressive. Kind of, once again, kind of reiterating why this may be an Arkansas team that absolutely can win the College World Series this year. Obviously one of the best teams in the SEC. And, boy, they were loving it against their hated rival, Texas. This kind of goes back to the old days of the Southwest Conference, things like that. Arkansas has kind of always had it in for Texas. So no doubt they were loving things in Fayetteville this weekend, being able to get that series sweep at the hands of the Texas Longhorns. They were enjoying all of that. Georgia also got a sweep up in Missouri this weekend. This is a bad Missouri team, not a good Missouri team at all. But if you're Georgia, your job is to go out and win those games, and it did. You get to 15 now conference wins. A year ago, that was kind of a magic number that kind of, gave you the regional hosting seed, gave you a chance to, a national seed, chance to get the College World Series, coming up just short a year ago. So Georgia kind of already with games still to play, building on that. If you want to see Georgia hosting a NCAA regional and an NCAA super regional, as of now, I would say they are well on track to be able to do that, really kind of regardless of what happens the rest of the way. One thing to be mindful of just a little bit, though, and I don't have any reason to believe this is going to materialize to anything much more than just the rumor stage right now, but keep in mind that Mississippi State is currently seeking a new baseball coach. They fired their guy the other day. You may start to see a little bit of Wes Johnson rumors here. I don't know that Johnson's even their top target, nor do I know that he would even be open to being a target here. I guess some believe that they're targeting the Virginia coach, very good program, but obviously, not quite SEC level at Virginia. That may be the guy they want most of all. And obviously Wes Johnson just signed a pretty big contract extension at Georgia prior to this season. But you may see some Wes Johnson rumors as it relates to Mississippi State. And if it gets to be anything real or tangible, we'll certainly tell you more about that. But at least worth considering that a little bit to see if that does materialize even more. For now, though, we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And speaking of baseball, fun to see now, not a great weekend for the Braves. Dropped 2 of 3 to the Dodgers, although they did avoid the season sweep at the hands of LA by winning last night. But on Friday, nice to see Georgia coach Kirby Smart on hand. There was even one point, I don't have this video to show you, but Smart was even doing like the tomahawk chop during one of the on-screen videos, but I will show you for our Golden Shoe today. Kirby hanging out there, spending a little time with Brian Snicker, who's down on the field before the game on Friday. Great to be able to see. Kirby does this sort of thing well. This is also that kind of time of year in which Kirby's probably as like sort of laid back and relaxed as he's ever going to be. The closest he gets to sort of downtime is probably kind of right now. So nice to see him taking full advantage of that. It was golf last week. Braves baseball here this weekend. We'll give a golden shoe to the Braves for hosting him and to Kirby for going in there and having a good time and really looking like a real fan hanging out with the Braves, which is kind of a fun thing to see. Lousy, stinking Gators, we are not real fans of theirs, but we are fans of the beatdowns that Georgia's been given to them. About 1,640 days, that's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia in football. And if Jared Curtis comes to UGA, we got to think that number's going to keep on climbing for a long time to come. Either way, we'll see you this evening for live coverage for Jared Curtis as he makes his college decision. DawgNation on hand for that. 5:30 p.m. tonight. All of it brought to you by Kroger. And, of course, back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Have a great day, everybody. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cooldown. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, let's get ready to take some comments here. We'll find out what's on everybody's mind. We won't go real long today because we got a lot to do to get ready for the Curtis thing. So I won't bore you with all the details on that, but we got to do a bunch of stuff on that. So let's get some comments here, and let's see how everybody's doing. Brian Whitaker says that Peyton Manning was also there on Friday, too. I did not know that. That's cool. Billy Cloud says, I hope Wes Johnson doesn't go anywhere. Yeah, I don't have any reason to think that he will, but I do think you may see some, at the very least, like message board rumors as it relates to that. In fact, you're probably already seeing some of those. But I don't know that that's anything more than just that right now. Let's see what else. Yeah, Alan Rabanchi talking about, and Bill Sanders talking about, a much more harsh and severe punishment for Texas. I think they should have gotten it. I think that a lot of situations like this, whether it's the Houston Astros or the Michigan football team or whatever else, I just think a lot of these organizations know they can get away with it. I just think they know they can get away with it. That when it comes to the other 29 major league franchises, they're not going to do something that greatly punishes the Astros because that's going to have the potential of reducing the value of the franchise. And considering the fact that the owners see their value sort of based out on the comps of the other teams, they're just going to protect each other. They're just going to do it. There's just not a lot of like accounting for like honesty and decency with stuff like that. I think the Michigan football situation the same way. It's one of the reasons why, although I do not believe that, like, say, NFL games like the Kansas City Chiefs are, predetermined outcomes or fixed or anything like that. I don't believe that because I just think it's too complicated. But when it comes to if an outcome like that is a preferred outcome, and of course it would be, it would take an extraordinary level of integrity to not try to put your thumb on the scale for a preferred outcome. And the only question I've ever asked about any of this kind of stuff is, when you look across the landscape of professional sports, or if you want to bring college sports into it as well, when you look across the landscape of sports, do you see an extraordinary integrity on display? I'm not accusing anybody of cheating or anything like that, but do you see extraordinary integrity? When you've got the Michigan story, whatever may or may not be completely true about that, or the old Astro story, or any number of things involving the New England Patriots through the years, is it extraordinary integrity? I would say probably not. Well, let's see what else. I mentioned before that I think there's been some overthinking when it comes to the Jared Curtis situation. I'm not picking on RKD. I think he's a good commenter, but he says, I hope that Curtis picks Oregon. Then we can focus on getting some damn football players. Like, that just to me seems overthinking. If you have a chance of getting a 5-star quarterback, of course you would want one. Of course you would want one. I mean, and yes, I know that Georgia's had its great success with like the former walk-on, things like that. But even if and I said this earlier, no one knows for sure if Curtis is going to be successful or not. That's true. but the odds of a 5-star quarterback being successful are still higher than a quarterback from a lesser category. Let's just not overthink this here. Jonathan Aaron says, are you having withdrawals, not being on a cruise this week? I do have a certain degree of cruise withdrawal. I think that's probably true. I think probably true. Also, Coach Prime trying to sue the NFL. I don't think I saw that story, Jonathan. Trying to sue for what? I don't believe I saw that. Adam J says that he would rather see Bo Bentley commit. And listen, I like Bo Bentley too. I really do. But if you put 100, whether it's like GMs who work in college programs or like the top talent evaluators from kind of like the sort of recruiting side of this, if you put them in a room, it's not close as to who's viewed as the better prospect. And look, I just spent a whole bunch of time telling you, that doesn't guarantee anything, but it is not a mainstream opinion that Bo Bentley is a better quarterback than Jared Curtis. There are people who say it. Those people may turn out to be right. But the consensus opinion is that Curtis is the better of the two quarterbacks. Obviously, if Georgia doesn't get Curtis, it's going to pivot to Bo Bentley. That's true. But the Bo Bentley recruitment's just as contested as the Jared Curtis's is. You've got, for instance, a team like LSU. LSU tried to spend big last year on Underwood, Bryce Underwood. I always want to say Blair Underwood. That's the guy from LA Law going back years ago. But Bryce Underwood, so they've got theoretically some money left over from that. I'm sure they're willing to make a huge offer to Bentley. I guess maybe Oklahoma's a factor there too. They're spending gigantic dollars on a quarterback this year. So if Georgia doesn't get Curtis, it no doubt will to pivot to Bentley. But that's not an easier quarterback, recruitment to win. B, I mean, let's just. I meant to ask John about this. Let's just not. Let's not assume that Bentley is the better prospect simply because he plays against better high school competitions. I've told you, I don't put a lot of stock into like who you play, what kind of competition it is, because if you're truly an elite prospect, it should all be inferior competition. Dennis Wilson, our resident Miami fan, says, 5-star quarterbacks mean nothing anymore. It's all about the transfer portal. But Dennis, I know you spend a lot of time down there in South Florida. You may not realize this. There are actually some teams that don't have to like desperately flail around every offseason trying to fill their roster. Believe it or not, and this is hard for you to believe, but like at the college football playoff level. Now, I know that Miami has never been there, but at the college football playoff level, this is a shocking thing. This is going to blow your mind. At the college football playoff level, the teams that make the college football playoff, they actually recruit out of high school. They get guys out of high school. They develop them over the course of a couple of years, in some cases, maybe even 3 years, and they get them ready to play. That there are some programs. This is a baffling thing, I'm sure, but there are some programs that operate on kind of a long range trajectory. They don't just sort of think day to day, week to week, putting out whatever fire happens to be in front of them. So yeah, I mean, there are some teams that do that. And of course, I'm just giving you a hard time, Dennis. Yeah, I'm always glad when you're here. I'm always glad when you're here. Let's see what else. Jack Fullerton says high schoolers learning the trickery of I can get you the national title in NIL negotiations and how to work it to their advantage. Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're seeing both sides right now, player and program, in all situations. I mean, these are big boy negotiations now. They really are. They really are. I think the touchy-feely era, to a certain extent, is kind of gone. Now, I think that relationships still matter. The example I use all the time. So if you go to your spam email, look at your spam folder. Like one of the things you're going to see is a whole bunch of people offering you some sort of high-value thing. Nigerian Prince wants to give you some cash. Some company wants to give you an unbelievably great deal. And in your mind, it's all in that spam folder. It's all too good to be true. Now, if your favorite company or brand, a company or brand that you've signed up to receive emails from, if they send you some sort of offer, well, oftentimes that's the sort of email that gets a click. It's what some people call like an offer to generate an immediate response. Because you have a relationship with that company. Recruiting, I think, kind of works the same way, which is, if you don't have a relationship with a particular program or particular coach, almost everything seems too good to be true. If you do have deep roots, multiple visits, long conversations, getting to know each other, then when the compensation offer comes, it comes with a kind of a whiff of believability, which is kind of nice. Yeah, Dennis, good-natured about me giving him a hard time. I was just messing with him. I do appreciate Dennis. And Frank Patterson, by the way, also checking in to us from South Florida down there. Frank represents the good guys, though. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a moment. See how they're doing there. JP asking about, what if you bring a guy like this in, you pay him, he sits the bench. Look, I do think the question there is on the Georgia side of, well, how much can you afford to pay a guy for not playing? That's the question you would ask for Georgia. But we're seeing a lot of quarterbacks that sort of sit multiple years. The most prominent example of that's Arch Manning. But, Nico, and I know he's gone now, but he also didn't play his first year at Tennessee either. That we're kind of in an age in which guys are not really expecting to play right away anymore. But if you bring in a guy like Curtis, just given the overall talent level, it's not impossible to think that he could also start at Georgia as a freshman either. DT says, I'm not worried about the money. That's just the cost of doing business now. Yeah, it really is. Is that, Georgia may not be the biggest spender, but, Georgia's also not a shrinking violet when it comes to a lot of this stuff either. They are playing the game like anybody else is. And there are plenty of people who also say, like Damon Wilson's recruitment comes to mind, where, at least allegedly, Georgia did get pretty aggressive in some of these. Let me get our buddy Savannah Bryan here for a moment. Brian saying, I saw today that the upcoming travel miles for SEC football teams this year, the Longhorns have the most at 9,000 miles, while the Dogs have the least at 2,000 miles. The media will likely say how easy Georgia has it. You're already seeing some of that, that Georgia somehow has this, much more favorable schedule. But we think there's a chance that teams like, say, Auburn and Florida are, and as much as we don't want that to be true, there's a chance that teams like that are greatly improved this year. Well, if that's the case, then as we've said, well, all of a sudden now this Georgia schedule that's supposedly so easy doesn't feel quite so easy anymore. I think you are right about that. And look, the byproduct of these massive conferences, there's going to be a lot of travel, especially if you are from the West. And anybody who's ever watched a cowboy movie knows Texas is the West. That's the whole point of the cowboy movies. The Wild West, Texas. Texas is the West. If you are the West and you come to the Southeastern Conference, you better expect to travel a lot because there's just not as many teams in that sort of Western quadrant as there are other places. That is an interesting stat, though. Let's see what else. Bill Camacho says, I'm shocked that the Dogs rank number 1 in the polls. But are they, though? There's a million baseball polls. But Texas has been number 1. Arkansas just swept Texas. It's like an Arkansas-Texas thing right now. K-Dog says, how desperate are we for a quarterback? But see, I don't even know. I don't know that I even use the word desperate here. Look, there are going to be plenty of 5-star quarterbacks that you're not going to have a chance at. They just live a different place. They have different relationships. Some of this, it just so happens because Georgia was in early, is that Georgia's just had a good shot at Jared Curtis the entire time. So, there are going to be plenty of 5-stars in a given year. Now, you would say, well, Georgia can get involved with anybody. But a cold call is different than a good, warm relationship. It's like if Georgia picked up the phone and called anybody, they could probably get a good meeting with them and, get some interest. But ultimately, that doesn't always go anywhere because it's not a warm relationship. Georgia happens to have a warm relationship with Curtis, who happens to be a 5-star quarterback. Sometimes in some given recruiting cycles, you sort of have better relationships than perhaps others. There'll occasionally be 5-star players, some of them quarterbacks, other positions. We never hear them mention with Georgia at all that the relationship just isn't there. You just can't always have, equal relationships. So some of this with Curtis is it's an elite player that Georgia happens to have a good relationship with. JP says Kirby Smart seems to value experience over anything else at quarterback. I find it hard for Curtis to see the field before year 3 if Gunner and Pug hang around. I would say that's the more likely prediction I would. But I would also say, and I'm not trying to be overly simplistic, but when a true freshman was the best quarterback on the roster, that's who Georgia played. And when a true freshman was not the best quarterback on the roster, then Georgia did something different. I'm not trying to be snarky. I'm really not. But in 2016, Jacob Eason was better than Grayson Lambert, so therefore he played. In 2017, even after Eason came back from injury with experience, Jake Fromm, in Kirby's eyes, was better than him, and so that's who Kirby played. In future years, we've seen freshmen kind of, in some cases, sort of buried on the depth chart a little bit because Kirby just thought he had better options. Like, I'm not trying to be overly simplistic. I'm not trying to be, snarky about it. But I think this will be Kirby's 10th year coming up? Yes? Is that right? Yeah, 10th year coming up. We've seen a couple of instances in which the freshman quarterback was the best player in the roster, and that's the guy they played. That also coincided in a time which you saw a lot of freshmen playing around college football. You do see less of that right now, I would say. I think that's true. But if Curtis is better than Stockton and Puglisi, I think he'd get the nod. Now, what could be interesting is, let's say that Curtis chooses Georgia today, sticks with a commitment, signs here, comes here for 2026. Let's say that Gunner just absolutely balls out. I mean, just absolutely just plays the football. Well, that's probably a Jake Fromm, Justin Fields situation, right? Now, hopefully it's not quite as tumultuous as that seemed to be. But if Stockton is an entrenched starter coming off a very good season, well, no, he's not probably getting moved out at that point in time. But if Stockton is good, if he's effective, I'd say anything can happen in 2020. When I say good and effective, but not necessarily, 10 best quarterbacks in the sport, I would say anything is possible at that point. But, yeah, we'll see. Savannah Bryan laughing about the Grayson Lambert reference. All right, let me bounce around a couple more comments here. Bill Sanders says I'm being a contrarian for its own sake right now. Contrarian about what? Am I doing that? I don't necessarily mean to be. Brian Whitaker checking out. Brian, we're glad you're here. Oh, let's see what else. Matthew Goodwin says, I think the 5-star offensive tackle could be just as valuable as Curtis. And in a lot of ways, I do too. I mean, listen, I think that one's massive for Georgia. I really do. Because, look, we know that Georgia has been able to win. Let me workshop this take. We know that Georgia has been able to win with all manner of quarterbacks, including 2 national championships with, not exactly, the highest rated recruit of all time. But they never won anything without a great offensive line. No team really has. You can have a lot of different kinds of quarterbacks, but there's really only one kind of offensive line for a successful team. It's a very, very good one. It's kind of like rock bands a little bit. Like, there are all kinds of front men for a rock band. Some of them are good looking. Some of them are good singers. Some of them are just weird. Some of them, there's a lot of different ways to be a front man, kind of like a quarterback. A lot of different ways to be the front man for a rock band. But to be one of the musicians in the band, it's about playing the instrument. And I would say that's kind of true for the offensive line. It's like, Georgia, Mike won the great quarterback. They've clearly won with a quarterback that wasn't like a first round, type quarterback. But there's only going to be one kind of offensive line that wins championships. That's a very good one. That's probably a little bit of a clunky analogy, but that's what I was thinking. Jaywalk mentioning the red vet for Jared Curtis. We have seen those photos. I don't love it. I mean, I don't love it, I guess, but I don't know. What are you going to do? G. Gray says if he was Georgia. By the way, G. Grace, did you go to the concert on Thursday? Our guy Shane Holiday, I think, was supposed to be there too. I never saw anybody. We were also kind of in and out. He says, I would choose Georgia. It's a better program than Oregon. Dan Lanning's still learning to coach. Interesting in that. I mean, I'm a big believer in Lanning, but I do believe, because they lost the playoff this year, because they kind of lost a couple of times to Washington at the end of the Pac-12 era, I do think that Lanning's going to start getting some of the need to win the big game talk. I think some of that's coming for Lanning. And I like Lanning. I'm a huge Dan Lanning believer. I think if Dan Lanning has critics, he's going to vanquish those critics. I firmly believe that. I'm a big fan of Dan Lanning, big fan. But just knowing kind of how the media works, there's going to be a little bit of, needs to win the big game chatter around Lanning. There's going to be some of that. Frederick Meredith says the Jackson Cantwell's one scary-looking 17-year-old. Yeah, it's amazing. There's the Curtis Corvette. And look, I've said before, look, if you're going to get the fancy car, I do like American muscle better than like one of these Italian-type deals. Something about that seems a little more homespun. But, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie and say, oh, man, I love the idea of a high school junior with a brand new Corvette. No, I don't love it. I don't love it. And I have to be honest about that. All right, let's see what else. Aaron Brown says, if we get him or not, enjoy your Cinco de Mayo. Viva Los DawgNation. I do like that, Aaron. That's a good idea. That's a good idea. What if the quarterback had a Tesla? Yeah. I think there's a lot about that conversation. You probably got to sidestep here these days. But I mean, listen. Here's what I'll also say too: is as somebody who just like sees high school kids, all high school kids now have nice cars. It's amazing. Like I'm 40, whatever, living a pretty good little life. I've never driven a nice car. Never. I promise you can go to like the local high school, one in our neighborhood, or kids go. All these kids drive nicer cars than I do. It's just amazing. I'm just not that into nice cars. I don't guess. Never really driven a nice car. High school kids now, it's not all brand new Corvettes like Jared Curtis, but it's also not. I mean, every one of these high school kids drives a nice car. It's amazing to me. Like my first car was a 1990 Toyota Corolla, the hand-me-down from my parents. And I hate to break it to my kids, but that's the only car they're going to get too, is some sort of hand-me-down from us. That's not what the other kids are driving these days. They're all so loud. Oh my gosh, I sound 100 years old by saying that. But yeah, kids drive nice cars. It's amazing to me. Because the idea that I would go out and get a nice car just is like the farthest thing from my mind. I'm always parking in these like little narrow parking spaces and, driving a million miles, just asking for trouble. But kids drive them. Jay Shipe says my Escalade Platinum isn't nice. If only. If only. I'm not even sure. I think we talked about this before. I'm not even sure I know how to drive a nice car. Like nice cars come with technology. Some of that's pretty complicated. I'm not even sure I'd know how to drive that. Now, I'm hoping that a Corvette is still push the button and go. I'm hoping. But something tells me Carson Beck's Lamborghini is not as simple as just sort of sit down, turn on the engine, and drive. Something tells me that requires some sort of something that I probably don't know how to do. Let's see what else. Lance D said his first car was an 84 Mercury Topaz. I was thinking about this the other day because listen to the Alan Jackson song about crazy about a Mercury. There aren't Mercuries anymore, right? It's one of we have several like car brands that just don't exist anymore. Mercury, Oldsmobile, just a Pontiac is gone. It's just amazing how many of these, like, in my life, it gives you an idea how old I am now. It's like I can start rattling off cars that used to exist, that just don't exist anymore. Adam J says nice cars attract speeding tickets in Athens. Maybe that's the case. Although I still probably get my not quite so nice car every now and then going a little faster than I should. All right, final comments. K-Dawg had a 1969 Nova SS. That sounds like it'd be pretty cool. DT said his first car is an Audi Quattro. Well, that's fancy. He said it paid for 100% by him. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, the one thing we are not in our family, we are not car payment people. Like that's just one thing. We just don't. That's probably why I've never had a nice cars. We just don't do car payments. But yeah, if you can purchase your own vehicle like that, that's great news. All right, let us see what else. Yeah, by the way, somebody also mentioned the good thing too about not having like a super nice car is you don't have to really worry a ton about it getting stolen. Like that's kind of nice. Do kind of enjoy that. Now listen, I'm not driving like a jalopy. I'm thankful for the transportation I have, but I don't spend a lot of time worrying about unlike some people in the news that somehow somebody's going to break in and steal my car. Now watch that, my car probably gets stolen. But it is the good thing about not having a super nice car is you don't have a lot of people like eyeballing it too much. KC says, I like Gunner with his 1984 truck. Yeah, but the funny thing is, like those, I don't want to like puncture the image here, but I'm pretty sure those like old square body pickup trucks, I'm pretty sure in the secondary market, those things are cranking up pretty penny. Now maybe if you've had it in your family and it's all original, then maybe that's one thing. But if you want to go buy one of those like square body, old school American pickups, you're going to pay a pretty big premium for that on the open market. That's one of those things. It's a little bit like a fine bottle of wine or something like that. The fact that it's older actually makes it better. Wildman Slayer says keeping the oil change is the most important thing for the life of the car. Never had a car that didn't last 8 years. Yeah, you take good care of that, you're probably in pretty good shape. Anything else before we go? Wildman Slayer, I like this. We may finish with this. This may be our last comment for the day. He says, I want Curtis, but I feel like we'll be all right either way. I do think we get Bo if we don't get Curtis. So let me address the last part first, and then I'll do the first part of that. I really don't know what to think about Bo Bentley. I think that Bo Bentley has been improperly discussed in some circles as if somehow he's just sort of I wasn't a very good student, so I didn't have a safety school, but some of y'all were good students. You applied to Georgia, and, you also applied to your safety school. Like 3/4 of the people at Auburn are there. Yeah, it's their safety school. Ole Miss, safety school. Now, listen, I wasn't smart enough to go to the safety school. I mean, I just not a good student in a traditional sense. But some of y'all had the safety school. You apply to Georgia. You also apply to the safety school. I think some people kind of view Bo Bentley as if he's the safety school, so to speak, in the Jared Curtis saga. And I don't think that's the case at all. As I said before, I mean, LSU, they're going to fight just as hard for Bentley as, Oregon's going to fight for Curtis. I really do believe. I think the meaningful thing here, though, is that while Georgia would be more than happy to pivot to Bentley, and I think they've been very honest with him about that ever since that I get is, Curtis is just their priority for right now. But I don't believe the Bentley recruitment is an easier recruitment just because he's a slightly lesser player. I don't think that's the case. However, the point that you make at the beginning of all this, I think this is 100% true. And this is the phrase that I said to Jeff Sentell on Friday. To me, the thing we get a chance to watch today, I'm excited about it. I really am. I'm really excited about it. And I'll tell you right now, I have no idea what I think is going to happen. People who know more about this than I do seem to think he's going to go to Georgia. People that I've talked to, they seem to think he's going to go to Georgia. But guess what? Those people have been wrong before. Like, I mean, I'm not going to act like, that the information they're getting isn't perhaps corrupted because of a process that's not exactly, streamlined anymore. So the point is, when I sit down to do this show later on this evening, I am on guard for anything. But to go back to what Wildman Slayer said, our commenter, I think it's high drama, low stress. I want Curtis to come to Georgia because, of course, you'd want a 5-star quarterback. Jon Stinchcomb said that very well earlier. Want Curtis to come to Georgia. He very well might, but he might not. And maybe the reason why he might not hasn't even happened yet. Maybe that's going to happen somewhere in the next few hours. It's high drama. And I like recruiting drama. I think recruiting drama is pretty entertaining. High drama, but also low stress. Because if Georgia doesn't get it, they may just pivot to something else. And the something else oftentimes, at least in Georgia's history, when you think about Stetson Bennett, of course, ends up being something fairly difficult to predict. So that's me. High drama. I'm kind of entertained by it. Low stress. I sort of feel like Georgia can still be okay no matter what. I would love to see Georgia win this one today. I would love to see, and I'll put my emotions on my sleeve, and then after this we got to go. I'd love to see him win it because I think there's some people who think that somehow Georgia can't win the sort of money whip battle. I think they could. I'd love to see Mike Bobo get a little trophy on the wall here. I'd be happy for him to have that happen. And while I can't guarantee that Jared Curtis is going to be the next, great thing, I'd say the chances are pretty good if it's a 5-star quarterback that's sort of drawn Matthew Stafford type comparisons. I would say all of that's probably pretty good. So that's the way I am. I want Georgia to win it. I think it'd be good news if Georgia did. If they don't, this is a program that's pretty good at pivoting. So we will see how that goes. All right, we got to go for now. Y'all check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on that, including, as we got to go through a really hot summer here, getting your AC unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. They'll do that for you. They're really good at that. So make sure you check them out on that. Get you new life out of an old unit. Boy, there's nothing that saves you more money than that. Especially in a year like this when maybe you need every dollar you can get. R.S. Andrews is great for you in that regard. So check them out online. It's rsandrews.com. And we'll see you tomorrow. Talk about this. Tonight we'll see you presented by Kroger for the reaction and the actual announcement itself from Jared Curtis. Then back here to recap it all tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.